come to order. First, I want to say thank you to a few people. I give special thank you to Chairwoman Kathy McMorris Rogers and all our staff, especially the committee staff, for the hard work putting this hearing together during such a busy time, and to the members on both sides for preparing and attending this important hearing today. When I first received this gavel, I never imagined that our first subcommittee hearing would be on something that hits so close to home. So I want to especially thank all of my colleagues here on both sides of the aisle for your continued well wishes for my constituents and for your genuine concern, participation, and willingness to help this small rural Ohio community. Next, I recognize and thank the first responders at the state and local level who were on the scene immediately, who ran into the danger, risking their lives to respond to the incident with professionalism and bravery. In particular, I recognize the firefighters, the all-volunteer firefighters in East Palestine who jumped into action into the smoke and fire, quite literally saving members in a small, tight-knit village of fewer than 5,000 people. It's a spirit of unity and selflessness which were common outside the Beltway and within. But I'll speak about it more in a moment. This happened here in Washington. I've been in East Palestine, listening to the concerns of residents and meeting with local and state officials and federal agencies. This includes our three witnesses here today. We have spent a lot of time in person on the phone talking about this family. These witnesses have all been involved in the response efforts, and I thank each of them for their commitment to assisting the East Palestine community. I look here before our subcommittee today. Administrator Shore and Director Vogel, thank you two specifically for representing your agencies, for you and your team's responsiveness from the state and federal EPAs. Your effective coordination has been and remains key to getting this long-term remediation done right. And a very special welcome to County Commissioner, who has been on the front lines since the very beginning. Wes is a problem, no matter if you're a Republican or Democrat, he's ready to work with anyone to ensure the safety and health of our community. Thanks for being here. Your input will be extremely valuable. We're going to dig into these. That brings us to the theme of the hearing today. The intent of this hearing is to be precise and targeted answers for the still suffering residents of East Palestine. Our goal simply is to try and know what we don't yet know. But as this goes on, more and more questions arise about long-term health effects of chemical exposure, the testing that's needed for the soil and air, and the commitment of those responsible for the cleanup. By the way, it's been a bumpy road to say the least. As we speak, there is a tons of still sitting there, very slowly being, because the proper legal process was improperly turned into a political football. I wonder if train derailment had occurred in interstate Philadelphia or in a village, rather than rural Ohio country. Those communities get the same treatment. Watching today, I know that many of you probably saw the news, the gloom seen around the world at the outset. Most immediately, folks on all sides of the political spectrum use this tragedy for photo ops or political gain on the national stage or to clicks on social media. The cameras go away. The news cycle moves on to something that gets better. But for this small community, this isn't over. It isn't going away. It's very real. Families are still in their homes and children are missing school. These folks won't just get to move on to the next thing. they get answers for them, not to play politics at their expense. Now, I know that that's not I acknowledge that, but it could have happened in any of my college districts. It is our job to reassure the small committee here in Congress on this committee. We will get questions citing until the health and environmental concerns of this community are addressed, because we do the same regardless of where it happened. Now, I understand that our roles as national policymakers are significant here. I know that there has been some disappointment from my Democratic colleagues as well with this state. More specifically, I read about this disappointment released in my last outlet last Thursday. One of my friends on the other side have not visited the site, have not seen the mountains contaminated, so looming over the village, and who have not time with the worried families there understand this. This hearing, or any member of this subcommittee, this hearing about the citizens of East Palestine, about those worried families who had their lives ensuring their long-term health, period. That's what it's about. Many aspects of this incident are responsible directly under this committee's, whether it be circular, waste disposal, chemical safety, EPA oversight. There's a lot to unpack here. But if you want to talk rail safety, let's do that after this hearing. In fact, introduced bipartisan rail safety legislation and colleague, I urge you all to co-sponsor it. Again, that's the way we can hold railroad more accountable. But that legislation will have to go through the Transportation and Infrastructure Committee. I urge my colleagues, please take our responsibility here today seriously. We learn from what happened in East Palestine, and we can use that as members of the Environmental Subcommittee to inform our American people. With that, I recognize the ranking member, Mr. Tonko, for 5 minutes, and I know I'm over my time, so I'll give you some additional time too if you need it.
That's fine. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for joining us today. Mr. Chair, I would like to again support you and the constituents of East Palestine. I am committed to effort to the public health and environment of the community and surrounding area. I know recovering from a disaster will require a commitment, and the community deserves clear and consistent communication about ongoing remediation activities and any remaining risks. Today, we have to learn about the government response to the derailment. The US EPA, the Ohio and Columbiana County Health District, along with the state and local agencies, play roles in the response to date. It is important for us to understand what happened, what the information has worked, and what lessons can be learned for future responses. We must also remember that Norfolk Southern these agencies, and while I believe today's hearing will be worthwhile because there is much we can learn from this point that Norfolk is not testifying alongside government officials for Norfolk Southern is a critical part of the response efforts, unified command, and is responsible for carrying out remediation activities. I'm not hearing the company's perspective. We're not getting the full to examine and in the recovery efforts. Successful responses to industrial disasters require cooperation of all it's only through a close coordinated effort that a comprehensive response can be made, including risks to affected residents. I do think this response was not perfect, and I hope we can learn more about what worked and truly what failed in order to inform other communities preparedness plan. I also know that after the immediate response, there begins a much longer, more effort. After the camera crews are continue to live with the fallout from this disaster. The EPA will conduct Norfolk Southern's remediation efforts. Certainly, congressional oversight of EPA can help keep remediation activities on track, both in East Palestine and in other contaminated sites across our country. The situation is not unique. There are hundreds of communities across our great country, in power plants and industrial facilities. Residents are often exposed to harmful air, water, and soil pollution that undermines their health and their quality of life. Even in my own district, about a decade ago, residents and first responders became very concerned with hazardous materials to their given neighborhoods. Those were oil trains, but they were shipped in the same inadequate DOT 111 cars. Upstate New York has been fortunate to avoid any major incidents. There have easily been about an all-day situation, or one of those many other communities live with the production, the shipment, the storage, or disposal of hazardous materials in their backyards. And that is why this tragedy is a reminder of the critical importance of our nation's environmental laws. Over the years, I've heard many claims about these laws being onerous requirements on businesses and stifling economic development. But let's be clear, these laws exist for a good public health and polluters that are all too willing to cut corners, increase profits, and indeed avoid responsibility. Efforts to erode these laws will only make it harder to hold polluters accountable and prevent similar disasters from occurring in the first place. There's no doubt that without EPA's on laws, the community would still be fighting with the company. While the situation will start time, it is EPA's oversight that will ensure that it occurs in a responsible manner. I was fully committed to supporting EPA's efforts to hold accountable and community whole. And I look forward to seeing how the can contribute to that effort. With that, I thank you, Mr. Chair, and I yield back.
The gentleman goes back. The chair now recognizes Chairwoman Morris Rogers.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Appreciate you holding us. There's no better person than you to lead this effort than people's representative for the community of East Palestine, Ohio, and the surrounding region. The train derailment and chemical spill in early February, you've been on the ground, alongside those you serve. You know their concerns, their worries. Our top priority is their health and safety. As you have said, Chairman Johnson, it's about points of obedience. I stay home to live, raise a family, work, and have hope for the future. Their livelihoods are on the line. Be able to trust environmental and public health protection government officials who are part of the derailment response. And that starts with full transparency of what happened with this derailment and the extent to which air, water, and soil get contaminated. That is our goal today, to gain a complete understanding regarding the ongoing federal, state, and local government efforts of this response. To that end, we'll hear from EPA Regional Administrator this morning. She's at the forefront of the federal environmental testing and response. People who work and live in East Palestine. We will be seeking answers from the EPA on why it has taken some of the actions that it has. EPA is doing to speed this cleanup along. How this committee can help EPA's efforts to ensure people are protected from environmental risks. Concern is the nexus between the disposal of contaminated soil, place of the cleanup, and the risk from delayed soil removal and concerns about the states to discriminate of waste facilities built purpose. In cases spanning late 1970s to the early 1990s, the Supreme Court declared unconstitutional state laws his announcement, though, is why this reminder needed. And what should be Director Vogel, the Ohio Environmental Protection Agency, want to learn about how the state is working in EPA on environmental testing and response to problems under its authorities as well as under state law. Finally, express appreciation for his being here. As the county's health commissioner, he's been looking to help me communicate directly with the people in the community. The one on the panel who serves to the people. Like Chair Johnson, he knows this community well. He knows the people and his friends and neighbors. We value the expertise he brings to the county's health assessment clinics and the private drinking water well as clean activities. And what he believes is critically needed for the cleanup. I want to emphasize again that we're not here for political points. We're here from the government on the ground in charge of the response to this tragedy. Any efforts to politicize will hurt our ability to help the people. They must they need officials to respond to this terrible event that's upended their lives. As Chair Johnson and I said, this will not be our last hearing on this. Also, we need Norfolk, and we will. Our work will continue. More hearings in the future. Again, Chair Johnson for the strong leadership you're bringing to your district on this committee. You have my support as well as together to answers on behalf of those you serve.
Back. Recognizing the committee, Mr. for his
Subcommittee is holding a hearing on the Norfolk Southern train derailment without a representative from the company responsible for this disaster and for the cleanup. Many Republicans did not invite Southern to participate in this hearing. This omission will result in the American people in this committee being deprived of the answers we all deserve from the company. Most of all, the police passing answers. It's really good that we're having this hearing today, but Norfolk Southern should be here. Norfolk Southern caused this mess, and their team is cleaning it up. The Protection Agency, the Highway EPA, the Columbia County, the company should have this happen. They plan to prevent it from happening again, but more to ensure the welfare of the community. Cleaning up a toxic site creates emotional for a community. One should have to fear that the water they drink, the air that they breathe is unsafe. Panelists in front of us today have truly answered many of our questions about the remediation efforts. State and local agencies have largely shifted into recycles over Norfolk Southern's activities. Norfolk Southern is actually moving the contaminated soil, contracting with the waste facilities, and hiring the contractors to manage the cleanup. Holds us back from fully using the breadth of this catastrophe. So my hope is that the tragedy can offer lessons for future incidents, opportunity for legislation, for disasters, and most importantly, shine a light on the plight of the folks on the ground in East Palestine, Ohio. And I don't want my disappointment over Norfolk Southern's absence to take away from how pleased I am with the work being done by the witnesses who did come to our federal, state, and local agencies is a good example of the side for the good of our communities facing unforeseen tragedies. EPA is on the derailment, arriving at the site hours after the accident. We're testing information with residents. As a long-time supporter of Superfund, I'm pleased to see EPA's using all of its authority to hold Norfolk Southern and every way they can. I also appreciate their work to reassure the residents of East Palestine that water is safe and for the continued oversight over Norfolk Southern's cleanup work to ensure the community is navigate this cleanup. The sharp reminder of how it's serious, robust environmental laws in place to protect communities across the nation from dangerous pollution in the air and soil. Republicans calls for the federal government to step in and respond to this disaster, prove that the government plays a critical role in public health and safety. But rather than future, Republicans are looking to further undermine. Republicans are proceeding with their what I call people legislation, that will tear down fundamental and public health protections that communities like East Palestine. So in my opening statement, where I began, must find from Norfolk Southern soon, we get answers to important questions that simply cannot be answered today. I appreciate that you said that we will hear from Norfolk Southern at future hearings, so I appreciate that, Chair Rogers. This tragedy, and with that, I yield back the remainder of the time.
Reiterate the commitment that Chair Rogers mentioned. We will hear from Norfolk Southern at the time. I would encourage all of our members, though, to take a look at that rail safety bill that we've introduced. That's now working its way through. That will begin to bring some relief to other communities, perhaps around the country. Let's go to our witnesses now for their opening statements. Deborah Shore, the Region 5 Administrator for the EPA, thank you very much for being here. We'll now go to you for your 5 minutes opening statement.
Good morning, Chair Johnson, Ranking Member Tonko, Chairman Rogers, Ranking Member Pallone, and members of the thank you today for the opportunity to address your questions. I want to start by affirming the mission to protect human health and the environment. Communities across America have clean air, clean and clean water. The health affected by the Norfolk Southern train derailment is a top priority for me and for EPA. As soon as EPA was notified of the derailment on February 3rd, EPA were on site within hours to support our partners who were in the lead of emergency response efforts. Every day since, EPA boots on the ground working with our federal, state, and local partners in a bipartisan manner to help this community. I've been in East Palestine listening to residents and have heard how devastating this development has been. They are understanding great and scared, and every time a train holds, they're reminded of the trauma inflicted upon them by Norfolk Southern. That is why we've used EPA's most powerful enforcement to hold Norfolk Southern accountable and to require the company to clean up the mess it made. Community alone. EPA will be with them for as long as it takes to ensure their health and safety. Given the unified command, EPA has more than site. Since the derailment, using state-of-the-art technology and that extensive monitoring has continued daily at 20 seconds community. Since the fire was detected any volatile compounds above established levels of health concern. It has also been March 21st, 600 have been screened and known to stand for elevated detection of chemicals have been identified. While EPA is encouraged by scientific data, we realize that the people of these may still question the health and safety of their community. We've been listening to these concerns, and that's why we require the testing. The water supply EPA is providing support to Ohio EPA, the lead water sampling efforts in partnership partnership with Pennsylvania Department of Environmental Protection, local health agencies, and public water systems. EPA has been engaged with the community to make sure people get the information they need. We the community established a resident hotline, participating
protecting public health and safety. Rather than joining us in strengthening the EPA for the future, Republicans are attempting to further undermine it. This week, House Republicans are proceeding with their what I call polluted over people legislation, H.R. 1, that will tear down fundamental environmental public health protections that protect communities like East Palestine. So I'll end my opening statement where I began. We must finally hear from Norfolk Southern soon, so we can finally get answers to important questions that cannot be answered today. I appreciate that Rogers said there will be more hearings, and I believe she specifically said that we will hear from Norfolk Southern at those future hearings. So I appreciate that, Chair Rogers. Norfolk Southern has to be held accountable for this tragedy. And with that, I yield back the remainder of my time. Mr. Chair.
The Chair Rogers mentioned, we'll hear from Norfolk Southern at the right time. I encourage all of our members, though, to go take a look at that rail safety bill that we've introduced. It's now working its way through the T&I committee process. That will begin to bring some relief to other communities, perhaps around the country. Let's go to our witnesses now. Their opening statements. Again, Honorable the Region 5 Administrator for the EPA, thank you very much for being here. We'll now go to you for your 5 minutes opening statement.
Good morning, Johnson, Ranking Member Tonko, Chair McMorris, Rogers, Ranking Member Pallone, and members of the committee. Thank you for inviting me here today and for the opportunity to address your questions. I want to start by affirming EPA's mission to protect human health and the environment so that all communities across America have clean air, clean land, and clean water. The health and safety of those who've been affected by the Norfolk Southern train derailment is a top priority for me and for EPA. As soon as EPA was notified of the derailment on February 3rd, EPA personnel were on site within hours to support our partners who were in the lead for the emergency response effort. Every day since, EPA has been boots on the ground working with our federal, state, and local partners in a bipartisan manner to help this community. I've been in East Palestine listening to residents and have heard how devastating this derailment has been. They are understandably worried and scared. And every time a train blows, they're reminded of the trauma inflicted upon them by Norfolk Southern. That is why we've used one of EPA's most powerful tools to hold Norfolk Southern accountable and to require the company to clean up the mess it made. Let me be clear, the residents of the greater East Palestine community are not alone. EPA will continue to be with them for as long as it takes to ensure their health and safety. Working with the unified community, EPA has more than 80 personnel on site. Since the derailment, EPA has been leading robust multi-year quality testing using state-of-the-art technology in and around East Palestine. And that extensive monitoring at 23 stations throughout the community. Since the extinguished on February 8th, EPA monitoring has not detected any volatile organic compounds above established levels of health concerns. EPA has also been assisting with air screenings in homes through a voluntary program to keep residents informed. As of March 21st, more than 600 homes have been screened, and no sustained or elevated detections of chemicals have been identified. EPA is encouraged scientific data to recognize that the people of East Palestine may still question the health and safety of their community. We've been listening to these concerns, and that's why we required Norfolk Southern to expand its on the water side. EPA provides support as needed to Ohio EPA, lead for water sampling in partnership with Pennsylvania Department Department of Environmental Protection, local health agencies, and public water systems. EPA has been engaging with the community to ensure people get the information they need. We built a community welcome center, established a resident phone hotline, participated in several town hall meetings, did resource fairs. We also started businesses to preview the work ahead. We continue to look for ways to provide information to the public. There's been tremendous progress in cleaning up and moving the waste out of the community safely, including removal of more than 9 million gallons of food waste and over 10,000 tons of soil, and mining 70% of the waste shipped off-site. By EPA. It must outline all necessary to by the agency will immediately up to 3 times the cost. Throughout Palestine, this is a greatest comeback. Thank you for inviting me.
Soil from under the tracks and works to restore the creeks. The investigation phase is also underway, which will continue to guide long-term remediation plans. To be fully protective of human health and the environment now and into the future, we're doing the following. Testing the municipal water supply on a weekly basis. In fact, today we will be taking our 8th round of samples. We also test 4 sentinel wells that are located between the contaminated creek. Together with our federal response partners, have been overseeing removal of the soil from beneath the tracks, and we do not allow the railroad to rebuild the tracks until we confirm through multiple rounds of confirmation sampling that contaminated soil has been removed. US EPA has brought the most sophisticated technology available to continually monitor and ensure that the air we are all breathing in East Palestine is safe. In direct response to community feedback, we have undertaken a robust soil sampling effort. US EPA recently announced that soil samples collected at the park in the village did not show concerning levels of contamination. We're making progress in the removal of chemicals from Sulphur Run and Leslie Run. We know those creeks are contaminated, but we were encouraged that earlier this month, we found sensitive aquatic life such as hellbenders, salamanders downstream of the run. To provide farmers and to customers of farms in the area, the Department of Agriculture will be testing forage crops, grasses, and other agricultural products. The Departments of Agriculture and Natural Resources in Ohio have found no evidence of any chemical-related deaths in any terrestrial animals. The steps that we are taking right now to remove contamination from Palestine are designed to ensure that there will be prolonged chemical exposure to anyone in the village. A secondary but equally important function of the governor's team in East Palestine is to be a reliable source of scientifically verifiable facts and information for the community. I am very proud that a large group of experts data and answer their good questions. Wes and I attended a meeting in East Palestine High School last week on lost sales. In response to this, we point people to the many excellent resources and data available on websites such as the Ohio EPA, Ohio EMA, the US EPA, the Columbiana County Health Department, where you can find current testing data, answers to frequently asked questions, and regular updates about community events and more. One theme of this committee hearing today is transparency. As a key function of the state's response to the derailment, I can commit to East Palestine that Governor DeWine and his cabinet will always tell you exactly what we know, what we don't know yet, and what we are doing to find answers for the village of East Palestine. I thank you for the opportunity to share my thoughts today. I look forward to your questions.
Thank you very much. We'll now go to Dr. Wes Venz for your opening statement.
Congressman Johnson, Vice Chairman Joyce, Ranking Member Tonko, and members of the Environment, Manufacturing, and Critical Materials Subcommittee. I am Dr. Wesley Venz, and I'm the Health Commissioner of the Columbiana County General Health District. I thank you for the opportunity to speak about East Palestine train derailment on behalf of the residents of Columbiana County and our Board of Health. I have served the local community for 14 years as Health Commissioner, and I'm very familiar with the local perspectives, community concerns, and family needs relating to the February 3rd Norfolk Southern train derailment. Thankfully, the derailed train fire is out and is cleared, but the ongoing concerns for health effects and environmental impacts to drinking water remain within the community. In addition to requesting their private wells to be tested, residents have expressed concerns about immediate health issues of sore throats, headaches, and anxiety, as well as unknown long-term health conditions, including the development of cancer. To address some of the most immediate health concerns of the residents, our agency has partnered with the Ohio Department of Health and the East Liverpool City Hospital to establish a health assessment clinic at the well-known First Church of Christ near downtown East Palestine. It also includes a 38-foot mobile clinic unit from the local qualified health center. The temporary services include a completion of a assessment of chemical exposure, or ACE survey, with a registered nurse during a 1-hour evaluation prior to a physical exam conducted by a physician. Toxicology and stress counseling are also available. To date, 120 evaluated, with some being referred to a primary care physician or mental health follow-up. To respond to the drinking water concerns, private wells in the priority areas of East Palestine and south along the streams can voluntarily be tested. So far, approximately 175 residential wells have been tested in the initial round of sampling, with dozens currently being sampled at this time to ensure drinking water continues to meet standards. The sampling effort is conducted by the local health district staff using an independent laboratory. At the same time, the Norfolk Southern contractor also collects a water sample for comparison. All water sample results are transparently shared with the homeowner. As we move forward with the recovery of the residents of the East Palestine area, I believe we need to implement some key initiatives to protect the community and improve public trust. The first and most obvious initiative is to improve rail safety, which I realize may be outside the scope of this committee, but as we see, improved rail safety is necessary to protect the public's health across the country. When rail safety is presented, I ask that you seriously consider the issue by relying on industry experts and good common sense to prevent such a disaster from happening to another community. The second initiative that I would consider, in addition to medical reimbursement model, would be the establishment of a health and wellness center in the village of East Palestine for area residents to utilize to address their long-term
letter to both Norfolk Southern and to state directors of environmental agencies, every single state, to remind Norfolk Southern of its obligation
Okay.
under the administrative order to find acceptable disposal facilities that have the capacity to take waste, to enter into contracts with them, and to move waste off-site. They have been adding a number of disposal sites, and we understand they're still entering into negotiations with others. but-
Okay, there's, the question though is protecting residents from potential contaminants in the excavated soil, the soil that's still setting there. Director Vogel, do you have a?
Congressman Johnson, thank you for the question. The steps that we're taking to protect any soil from contaminating the town are fairly extensive. These are very carefully controlled areas that have been built just to store contaminated soil. They're layered carefully, they're covered. In terms of transport, I know you've been there, you've seen the stations. The trucks that roll out are covered carefully, the tires are washed, there's street sweepers. We're doing everything we can to contain even the water that washes the tires of the trucks. We are vacuuming that out and storing that water is because it's contaminated. So yes, sir, we're doing everything we can.
Okay, all right, thank you. Administrator Shore, your boss, EPA Administrator Regan, who he and I have very frequent conversations, by the way, about the issues there, recently sent letters to the states, as you mentioned, to remind them that it is unlawful to refuse the disposal of out-of-state waste based upon origin. Why did the EPA believe it needed to send those letters to tell them that they cannot interfere in interstate commerce? Because, for instance, in one case, trucks were actually turned around at the gate of a proper certified disposal facility and sent back to East Palestine to sit practically in my constituent's backyard. Why did the EPA believe that it needed to send those letters?
Chairman Johnson, the instance you cite occurred before EPA assumed responsibility for the under the unilateral administrative order for the cleanup. We don't know who told those trucks to turn around, whether it was the disposal facility itself or someone else. But the reason that
Administrator Shore, don't mean to interrupt you, but I was there when that order was given, and it was a couple of weeks later before those trucks were turned around. So I'm not sure I understand the timing, but that's okay. Go ahead with your answer.
Administrator Regan and the agency were compelled to send the letters to the states and to Norfolk Southern because there was another instance in which Norfolk Southern had entered into a contract with a licensed, permitted disposal facility that was on the approval list for off-site disposal of hazardous waste. And the governor of that state let it be known that he had told the company not to accept the waste.
But that was illegal for them to do that under the law, right? I mean, we know that. So it's my understanding that the EPA issued the order to stop shipments of that contaminated soil at the outset of the cleanup when the governor of Michigan raised an objection. Is there any statutory authority you can point to that's grounds for such an action? We know that facility was permitted and equipped to dispose of the waste. So who at EPA made the decision to turn the trucks around?
Chairman Johnson, no one at EPA issued an order to stop shipments, nor did anyone at EPA order that trucks be turned around.
Why were they turned around?
This occurred during the transition period between Ohio EPA and US EPA, assuming the lead for the emergency response. As such, under the unilateral administrative order, all disposal facilities are required to be on the CERCLA approved off-site disposal list. So we needed a few days to review what had occurred and ensure that those facilities that Norfolk Southern had contracts with were on that approved list. Once we determined which ones were on the approved list, It's up to Norfolk Southern to ship waste off the site.
Okay. Well, I have some additional questions. Hopefully, my fellow members will yield me some additional time a little bit, but my time has expired for now. I'll now turn to our ranking member of the subcommittee, Mr. his questions.
Thank you, and thank you to each of you for your testimony. I appreciate that intergovernmental coordination and cooperation is never easy, and I'm certain we will discover ways that events could have been handled more effectively. I have no doubt that the agencies before us today will continue to work hard to protect the public health of the communities affected by the derailment and to hold Norfolk Southern accountable. Regional Administrator Shore, I would like to try to establish some basic facts around the multi-governmental response to the derailment so that we have a common understanding of what had happened and who was responsible for which of the aspects of the response efforts. So how soon after the derailment were EPA personnel on the scene? How soon after the derailment were EPA personnel on the scene?
We had several of our on-scene coordinators on scene and establishing air monitoring equipment within hours, approximately 2 a.m. on the morning following the derailment.
Thank you. And how soon after the derailment did air monitoring begin?
As soon as those personnel were on site, they began establishing an array of monitors.
Thank you. And what was EPA's role in ensuring adequate air monitoring of the area?
It's been EPA's role since shortly after the derailment, since on-scene coordinators, that's what we call our emergency responders, arrived on the site, both from Region 5 and Region 3, because this incident affected Pennsylvania as well as Ohio. Setting up monitors, they've been conducting monitoring and expanding the suite of tools that were used to conduct a multi-layered monitoring and sampling approach, and have since established 23 sites around the community where we have installed a variety of monitors, and then later brought a highly sophisticated mobile monitoring bus.
And how?
It's continued 24/7 since we arrived.
Thank you. And how soon after the derailment did surface water and groundwater begin to be monitored and sampled for potential contamination?
I would defer to Director Vogel, whose agency had the lead for the water monitoring piece.
So what would that response be, Commissioner?
Congressman Tonko, thank you for your question. Surface water began being sampled immediately because we knew that the creeks were contaminated, and the village began testing its municipal water on the 8th of February.
Thank you. And back to Administrator Shore. Can you discuss EPA's role in water testing? The role of the agency in water testing?
I'm sorry, sir, I'm a bit hearing challenged, so I didn't
Can
hear
you
your
discuss
question well.
EPA's role in water testing?
Discuss the EPA's role in water testing. Yes, sir. We did support Ohio EPA and conduct some surface water tests, and also provided support to the Columbiana County Health District in its role in testing private well waters as requested.
And when did EPA begin to use its Superfund authority to compel Norfolk Southern to remediate the given site?
EPA issued the unilateral administrative order under CERCLA on February 21st. It went into effect on February 27th.
And am I right in stating that the company's, the remediation is happening at the company's expense?
Yes.
And can you discuss EPA's role in overseeing and approving the company's work plan?
So under the Unified Command, which was established as a result of the unilateral order, Norfolk Southern has been required to submit extensive and comprehensive work plans, portions of which have already been approved for soil sampling, for instance, and the rest is being reviewed by the representatives of local, state, and other federal agencies that comprise the Unified Command. And Norfolk Southern is being compelled to follow those work plans under the oversight of EPA.
And then finally, if Director Vogel and Commissioner Vins could respond to the question as if you have received the assistance you require from US EPA to carry out your responsibilities.
Congressman Tonko, yes, I believe we've been very happy with our response partners on the federal level. Thank you.
And Commissioner?
Yeah, thank you for the question, Representative. Yes, we've been pleased. We receive, in fact, today, support from the US EPA in our private water sampling program with teams in the field.
That's terrific. With that, I yield back, Mr. Chair.
Gentleman yields back. The chair now recognizes the chairwoman of the full committee, Kathy McMorris, for her questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. To all our witnesses, thank you for being here and for your attention in response to the strategy. I wanted to focus on risk communication, which is so important in an emergency. In 2013, a National Academies of Science manual stated, quote, "It is important that communication strategies include plans to collect information, reduce uncertainties, or plans to revisit the decision once more data are gathered." The National Academy specifically emphasizes reporting uncertainties when fright factors are involved or intended audience distrust outcomes that suggest low risk, but the public is convinced the risks are serious. So to all of you, I just would like to ask you a few questions. When it comes to the environment or the health risks posed by air, water, and soil contamination in East Palestine, how much scientific uncertainty exists where people should not draw conclusions about the results just yet? And we'll start with Administrator Shore.
Chairman McMorris-Rodgers, science is our agency's lodestar, and we base our work and decisions on the data we have and on the best scientific knowledge available to us at the time.
Are you able to speak to the uncertainty that may exist today regarding some of the conclusions that have been drawn about the chemicals that were spilled in this tragedy?
We have, in the air monitoring realm, relied on a multi-layered approach of sophisticated equipment that has both sampling and monitoring, including what's called a TAGA bus, a trace atmospheric gas analyzer bus that can take samples, analyze them in real time, and that has for 10 hours a day been circling the community and more particularly the work site. Based on the data we have, we've seen no sustained elevated levels of any compound that would be of health concerns. I understand that people are concerned, and that's why if they have concerns about their own health, we urge them to seek, as Dr. Vins described, to go to the clinic or consult with their primary healthcare provider.
Thank you. Director Vogel?
Chairwoman, thank you for the question. I can't speak to the level of uncertainty out there. I can tell you how we address uncertainty. What we continue to do is test on a regular basis. It's the reason for the sentinel wells and the monitoring wells, so that when, first of all, we are transparent in all of our test results. They're all published on the website, all their gory detail, right? Every tick, everything is there. And so if we do find something, that will inform the next step. So it's a very carefully phased approach where, again, as Administrator Shore says, we're following the science. So that if we do find anything, we'll know it before it's a public health concern, and we'll be able to address it accordingly.
Okay, thank you. Dr. Vins?
Yeah, thank you for the question, Chairwoman. As far as our agency is, we're very strong. We're a small agency of only 17, but technically I feel we're very, very strong, but we are not experts. And so we rely heavily on experts in any industry, in any field. When it comes to water quality, certainly air monitoring and stream monitoring, we have some of our local experts here that we rely on. When it comes to healthcare, we rely on our partners, as we've talked about with the health assessment clinic that we've got. We have online a direct line to the toxic toxicologists at the Poison Control Center. So those experts are what really help us address that uncertainty. But to take that information and communicate that directly to the resident is the most important part. We find that we're most effective one-on-one with the resident. Certainly, we've got the ability to do press releases, and we, exercised that a lot during our recent pandemic. However, we find that in this instance, to have that conversation one-on-one with the resident is most important. So gain good information from an expert, and then actually have a conversation to translate that. Use our technical folks, use our partners, use poison control, use physicians. Translate that information into a usable form so that the resident has a higher level of confidence. That helps to reduce the uncertainty.
Thank you. Is there anything we could have done better or more data that we need in this situation? Each of you?
I guess I'll respond to that and say it's very important to continue the ongoing monitoring. I think more information, ongoing information, things change. Certainly when we talk about groundwater, we talk about activities at the site to continue to monitor the air, to continue to monitor groundwater, to continue to monitor the streams. These are all very, very important issues, as well as monitoring the health of the residents going forward. So I think monitoring is the key.
Okay, thank you. My time's expired. I'll yield back. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Chairwoman yields back, and the chair now recognizes the gentlelady from Colorado, Ms. DeGette, for 5 minutes.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chairman, and I'm really happy the witnesses are here today to give us an update into the ongoing remediation. And I'm also pleased, Mr. Chairman, that you have announced that you're going to have an additional hearing with Norfolk Southern, because I think it's really going to be important to hear the second half of the story. But one thing I've been thinking about, I represent an urban community of Denver, and in Denver and around the area, we've had a number of environmental contamination events, and people don't really think about the need for rapid response and for quick action and effective action until there's an emergency like this. Then they're really happy. They think, oh, what is the EPA? But then when this happens, they're really happy to see there's an agency with the expertise and ability to come in and do a quick turnaround. And so we've heard from everybody about the robust, swift response that we've been having. What I want to ask about is now that we're and I think Administrator Shore, you talked about how just in the last few weeks you've been really ramping up the efforts. But what I'm wondering is what type of long-term monitoring is EPA going to put in place to ensure that there's continued health of the environment in East Palestine?
Thank you, Congresswoman. And as you noted, our focus at the moment is to compel Norfolk Southern to do the job of cleaning up the mess it made. The best way to reduce any long-term effects is to get the waste moved off of the site and into safe liquid and solid disposal sites. Then there will be far less long-term exposure. However, it is EPA's role and mission to protect public health and the environment, and we can establish long-term air, water, and soil monitoring programs to continue looking at the remediation and the results for years to come. We've done that in other sites. We will do that in East Palestine and the surrounding community.
So that's your intention, once you deal with the immediate crisis, to then put that kind of a plan into place?
It is.
Now, is the EPA intending to use the unilateral administrative order to ensure that Norfolk Southern establishes a health and environmental screening program beyond this initial cleanup period?
Right now, the focus of the unilateral order and our work with Norfolk Southern is to make sure the site is cleaned up. I think the responsibility for that longer-term health effort, I support what Dr. Vins recommended, and that may have to be negotiations with Norfolk Southern going forward.
Obviously, that hasn't started yet.
Not to my knowledge.
Okay. Do you have any idea what the, well, I'm sure you do. Can you tell me what the authorities that the EPA has to require Norfolk Southern to continue to provide to the community after this initial cleanup?
The order does give EPA the authority to compel Norfolk Southern to pay for and conduct all the necessary cleanup activities for soil, water, and so forth, and that will endure until we're sure that it's cleaned up.
So just beyond these initial efforts?
I don't know the answer to that.
Okay. Do you have all the tools that you need from Congress to properly and effectively respond to this crisis?
Thanks for that question. I certainly would urge Congress to support the agency's budget proposal because that gives us the resources we need to provide the kind of emergency response that you noted is so welcome in urban and suburban and rural communities across the nation.
Great, thank you. Thank you so much, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Gentlewoman yields back. The chair now recognizes the gentleman from Georgia, Mr. Carter, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And before I begin, let me thank you, Mr. Chairman, for your outstanding work in representing your constituents during this time. We've all been in awe of your constant attention to this and appreciate it. I'm sure the people of East Palestine appreciate it even more. And thank y'all for what y'all are doing. This is extremely important to these people. This community has been devastated by this. I can only imagine what they're going through. I know in my district, in South Georgia, I represent the entire coast of Georgia, and we have 4 Superfund sites in one county, as a matter of fact. And I know how it can have such a devastating impact on a county. And help me out here, Administrator Shore, just and dumb it down for me, if you will. If it's a Superfund site, how are they going to decide whether it's going to be a Superfund site or not? Will it be a certain area? Will it be, because as I understand, they're not going to be able to live in that area if it's deemed to be that, is it?
The authority that is granted to the agency under CERCLA for emergency response and removal is sufficient to compel Norfolk Southern to pay for everything and to get the cleanup done without it being added to the national priority list.
Okay. Well, I'm glad to know that because, and I hope you're right, I hope that does come to fruition and happens because I will tell you, these Superfund sites that I've had in my district have been that way for decades. I mean, they are still not resolved. And some of them are prime areas that need to be developed if we could. And prime commercial areas. So it does have a big impact. And I think y'all recognize, I see nodding of heads. I hope that means you recognize that. Help me out, Administrator Shore. As I understand it, y'all have moved from the emergency response now to the remediation process, or remediation phase, I should say. So what did the EPA do during the emergency process, the emergency response?
EPA's role has been several-fold, but immediately was to conduct the air monitoring, which we established within hours after the derailment and have continued to do with personnel on the ground, taking samples and using monitors in a multi-layered, redundant approach. But also under the unilateral administrative order, EPA sits at the top of the unified command, coordinating the response, coordinating the cleanup, and compelling Norfolk Southern to follow the work plan that it has submitted.
Okay, so now you're moving to the remediation phase, is that correct?
It will lead to that, but I view it as still in the removal phase because we have to get that contaminated soil and the contaminated water resulting from the derailment
Right.
to safe disposal sites.
And then what will take place in the remediation phase? What happens then?
Then there'll be restoration of stream banks and the places where the soil was removed from along the railroad sites. And I think the larger vision for the community that they're already beginning to work on, such as parks and streetscapes
Right.
and so
Any,
forth.
any idea what kind of time frame we're talking about here?
Well,
I mean, are we talking like in my district, decades?
we believe the core of the removal of the contaminated site and the restoration of the tracks will be several months.
Okay. The chairman mentioned in his opening statement, and I think it's extremely important, the importance of communication. And I hope that we will all keep that in mind, how important that is. God bless these people for what they're going through and having to go through by no blame of their own. And I want to make sure that we all understand how important the communication is, regardless of whether the news is good or bad. We need to know, and when it needs to be truthful. You need to tell them and straight up what's happening, what's going to happen, what's got to happen. That's going to be extremely important. So thank you again. Thank you all. This is not an easy situation, but it is a situation where we really need to have some responsible people in charge. So thank you, and I'll yield back.
Gentleman yields back. The chair now recognizes the ranking member from New Jersey, Mr. Pallone, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Let me thank our panelists again. I appreciate your tireless work on the ground in East Palestine to swiftly get this community back to normal, and I appreciate your insights regarding the ongoing response and cleanup efforts. Unfortunately, as I mentioned earlier, we're not getting the full story on the train derailment and cleanup because the majority responsible party, Norfolk Southern, I had a lot of questions for them, but I'll have to save my questions for when they appear in the future before the committee. I wanted to say, as a longtime Superfund advocate, I am pleased to see EPA use its CERCLA authorities to immediately hold Norfolk Southern accountable and to start the cleanup ahead of the unilateral administrative order to the company. So let me ask the Regional Administrator Shore, when did cleanup responsibilities shift from EPA to Norfolk Southern, and what protections were put in place to ensure health and safety of the community during that shift?
Thank you, Congressman Pallone. The transition from the state agency, which has the delegated authority, and every state has an emergency response capability, and so Ohio was on the ground working with the local firemen and other agencies as EPA arrived shortly after the derailment. It is typical in these kind of emergency responses for the state agency to take the lead in the early days. And Norfolk Southern was complying with the directives from the state. They continue to comply, but we've found over time that it's important to have all the authority to hold the principal responsible party, in this case Norfolk Southern, accountable, which is why on February 21st, several weeks after the derailment, EPA issued its unilateral administrative order. And you may have seen a press conference where Administrator Regan announcing that was joined by Governors DeWine and Governor Shapiro, by Congressman Johnson and Congressman DeLucio, and by other officials from both states and both parties in a unified effort to demonstrate that we are working together without cease to try to protect and restore the people of East Palestine and the community.
Now, let me issue again, because I want to get to Mr. Vogel. Looking further down the road, if additional contamination is found after cleanup is complete, will Norfolk Southern be held legally responsible? Briefly, if you could answer that.
Yes.
All right. And then let me thank you. Director Vogel, in your testimony, you state that EPA has brought in state-of-the-art air monitoring technology to East Palestine to help reassure the community in that their air is safe. Is it fair to say that EPA and their technical assistants have been very helpful to you during this cleanup process?
Congressman, thank you for the question. Yes, unquestionably, the air monitoring has been critical going back to the early days of this incident. And I'd also say the order has been extremely valuable for cleanup efforts.
Thank you. And let me just go back to Regional Administrator Schur. Last question. How would you characterize the working relationship between the agencies in Unified Command?
I would characterize it as working well together. Certainly, some of the representatives have strong opinions, as they're entitled to, but the Unified Command provides a platform for sharing data, for sharing opinions, for reviewing work plans, for reaching a common and agreed upon approach to solving this.
Well, thank you. I just want to say I'm encouraged to see the EPA, Ohio EPA, and the Columbiana County General Health District working together to share real-time information with the community, dispel misinformation, and provide critical services. There's no question the residents of East Palestine deserve swift action, and they also deserve answers from Norfolk Southern, and they deserve a Congress ready and engaged to hold all parties accountable. So I look forward to continuing this conversation in future hearings with Norfolk Southern present, and I know that, as I said before, that Chair Rogers has made that commitment. So thank you, Chairman Johnson, and thank you again, the witnesses. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Chair now recognizes the Vice Chairman of the Environment, Manufacturing, and Critical Materials Subcommittee, Dr. Joyce, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman Johnson, for holding this hearing. I want to acknowledge your leadership that you have shown in face of this crisis in Ohio. It resonates throughout this committee, and it resonates throughout Congress. Thank you, sir. My district also is no stranger to the rail industry. Numerous towns were founded and grew up around railroad stations and repair shops. My own hometown of Altoona owes its creation to the Pennsylvania Railroad. Both of my grandfathers worked for the railroad. My wife's grandmother worked for the railroad. Realize that railroading is an integral part of the DNA of many of my constituents. The rails right now, they run past churches, they run past schools, soccer and baseball fields, and many homes. For many small towns, not just my own, for many small towns within Pennsylvania's 13th Congressional District, this rail accident is a sum of many fears. 11 of the 12 counties that I represent have significant rail traffic that transport the same chemicals that were leaked and burned in the derailment in East Palestine. My constituents are not just concerned about what has happened, but they are worried about what could happen. They need to know that the railroads are operating safely. They need to know that should the worst happen, the federal government, and specifically the EPA, will prioritize their well-being over everything else. Residents on both sides of the Ohio and Pennsylvania border have been repeatedly told that their air is safe to breathe and that their water is safe to drink. As I talk to my constituents, there is a perception that there was a rush to judgment to determine the chemical levels were safe. I am concerned that our environmental protection agencies have lost credibility in many of these communities. My first question is for Administrator Schur. Can you please explain how the US EPA, the OEPA, and the Columbiana County reached this conclusion for the air and water quality?
Thank you, Congressman Joyce. EPA's on-scene coordinators, once they learned which chemicals and constituents were on the train and had spilled as part of the derailment, consulted with our toxicologists and representatives from the CDC and ATSDR to identify those chemicals of greatest concern and made those the focus of our initial monitoring efforts. We continue to consult with health agencies about screening levels and adjusted our monitoring accordingly as the response continued. But EPA has deployed a comprehensive network of tools to monitor the air quality and to understand as much as we can about potential risks so we can reduce those risks and protect the health of community members. Now we've collected hundreds of laboratory-analyzed air samples that show levels of a wide range of chemicals have remained below screening levels in the community since the derailment.
Administrator Shore, even though the EPA's District 5 does not include Pennsylvania, can you speak to how EPA assessed the inhalation risk that these chemical mixtures pose to people who are downwind in the state of Pennsylvania?
Yes, Congressman, excellent question. Region 3 is the region that includes Pennsylvania, and Region 3 also had on-scene coordinators on the scene within hours after the derailment. We, in the subsequent soil sampling that's being conducted, we looked at the information about the direction of the plume from the vent and burn event and focused that primarily where there might have been aerial deposition of soot or particulate matter, and those soil samples have been collected in Pennsylvania.
And today, what soil, air, and water tests are continuing to occur in Pennsylvania?
Additional soil samples will be collected in collaboration principally with the Pennsylvania Department of Agriculture, the local Farm Bureau, and the Pennsylvania Department of Environmental Protection.
And I think that's so important with agriculture being such a large component of Pennsylvania's industry. How long into the state is this testing going to continue?
Long in time
In
duration,
duration,
or distance?
yes.
Oh,
I'll take both. Let's talk about the radius and distance, and let's talk about time duration.
EPA has conducted directed Norfolk Southern to conduct tests in the area where it was principally determined there might be deposition. But if others wish to have soil tested, call us, we'll work with them.
Thank you. Appreciate you being here. And again, I thank the chairman for holding this.
Gentleman yields back. The chair now recognizes the gentlelady from Illinois, Ms. Schakowsky, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just want to begin by saying I think you hear from this committee that all of us on both sides of the aisle are totally committed to working with you and helping you address the crisis in your community, which could have happened in any one of our communities. And I do want to thank you for beginning this hearing with recognizing the dedication of the representatives of the Environmental Protection Agency. And as a moment of personal privilege, let me just say about my longtime and dear friend, Deborah Shore, who has really dedicated her entire life, well before this, to environmental protection. For about 15 years, she was on the board of the Metropolitan Water Reclamation District and transformed that agency in Cook County into really an environmental organization protecting our water, our great lake. And I agree with you that the work of the EPA getting on the ground within hours was really an example of the work that they can do, and that they're still there and have been there the whole time. And I know that Administrator Shore was personally there for 14 days on the ground, and representatives are still there, and I know the local EPA, the state EPA has also been there. But I do want to, and with all due respect to the chairman, express my frustration that Norfolk Southern is not here, and I do look forward to seeing them as the responsible party, at the one that is responsible for the cleanup. We do need to really understand exactly what they have done, what they are going to be doing as quickly as possible. You talked about down the road legislation, but frankly, we have to have immediate answers. So I have a question for our Region 5 administrator. I want to know what the EPA has done, not only for the community? I mean, not only for the things that you have said that have been done, but what kinds of things have you done directly for the community to make sure that they are being informed and engaged and involved and notified?
Thanks, Congressman Schakowsky. I never thought I'd be here at a committee hearing speaking to my own congresswoman. EPA has been involved with the community in a number of ways. I first met Chairman Johnson at the first town hall meeting about less than 2 weeks after the derailment, where I and representatives from our agency were there to answer questions and explain to the community how our equipment worked and so on. And I've been at subsequent town meetings and community meetings. I've met with local business leaders. We opened a welcome center in town where more than 400 people have stopped by to have their questions answered. As noted, we've just started sending out, this is the second week of a newsletter mailed to 5,000 residences and businesses in Ohio and Pennsylvania, and dropped at the library and the banks and Circle K and other places for people to pick this up, which includes top questions of the week, as well as information about the work plan. What can people in the community expect to happen, and who to call if they have
Let me ask one final thing. I know that you testified before the Senate and you mentioned here this morning. Tell me what you need for the Environmental Protection Agency to be able to do its job. You mentioned about the budget. So if you could just conclude with that.
Well, the budget includes not only the resources we need for our emergency responders, for cleanup work, but for the water and wastewater infrastructure needs that are seen throughout the nation, both rural and urban, and the congressionally directed spending that we wish to implement and oversee. So it really helps the agency do its aspirational and important mission of protecting public health and the environment.
Thank you so much for your service. Appreciate it. I yield back.
Gentlelady yields back. The chair now recognizes my colleague from Ohio, Mr. Balderson, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you all for being here today. I also want to thank Chairman Johnson for holding this important hearing and for the work he's done on the ground in Ohio to help his constituents after the aftermath of this disaster. Since the disaster occurred on February 3rd, Congressman Johnson has been a tireless advocate. I've even called to check on him a couple times, and he's hanging right in there, and he was there every day, nonstop, and I was proud to partner with him when he introduced the Bipartisan Rail Act, which provides meaningful reforms to rail safety, and I encourage my colleagues to support the chairman's legislation. I also want to say congrats, but also for the phenomenal job that, it's hard to even say this, Director Vocal has done as the new director of the Ohio EPA, and something that, as a friend that it's an honor to watch you and what you've done. And that's my first question is to you, Director. Do you believe that this derailment has caused any threats to human health and the community's treated drinking water?
Congressman Balderson, thank you for the question. If I can show my visual aid that I use with the community, I'd like to. I want to acknowledge that this has been obviously a traumatic event for the community, and what we're doing is everything we can, as Ms. Shore said, to remove any contamination so it never does. But we'll keep testing. And I want to say that the reason that we have been able to say that the municipal drinking water is safe is based on an Ohio EPA map that pre-exists the derailment. This is the source water protection map. So the municipal well field is right here, if folks can see that big well in the blue. So the derailment happened way over here, 1.5 miles away from the well field. And we know how the water flows, down this way, down the creeks. So the derailment would not have affected the municipal water source, and we knew that very quickly after the derailment. So thank you for letting me bring my visual aid. And I want to be clear, though, that we're not going to stop testing to make sure that there will be no effects in the long term.
Okay, thank you, Director. Administrator Shore, do you and the U.S. EPA agree with what Director Vogel just presented?
Congressman, I do. I wish I'd been able to bring a bottle of East Palestine municipal water with me today because I drink it whenever I'm there.
Okay, thank you. Dr. Venz, it was a pleasure to meet you this morning. Are the testing results of the private wells in alignment with the results from the water systems?
Yes, they are. Thank you for the question.
Okay. Under the Safe Drinking Water Act, Ohio EPA has primary federal enforcement responsibility for treated drinking water standards. Director Vogel, how many community water systems serve the affected community?
Congressman, there's the municipal well field, which has 5 wells providing to the village drinking water treatment plant. There's 1 well at the State Line Tavern that is also a public water system.
Okay. How many community water systems serve? Is there more than one source of drinking water used? Is there,
It is just wells.
Just wells,
source
okay.
water. Yes, sir.
all right. Has the Ohio EPA tested all relevant sources for contamination?
Congressman, we have tested the raw water and the finished water.
Could you please provide the results of those tests for the record?
We can, and they're also posted on Ohio EPA's website.
Perfect, thank you. What specifically are you testing for, Director?
Congressman, we're testing for we took a very broad approach to testing municipal water. It's about 190 compounds, volatile organic compounds, semi-volatile, also of course, the compounds of concern from the derailment. It's a very long list, and again, all of that is on the website.
Okay, appreciate it. And again, thank you for your great work and coming into something like that very quickly. Mr. Chairman, I yield back my remaining time.
Will the gentleman yield?
Yes, sir.
A couple of quick questions. I'll take advantage of my colleagues' remaining time. This may, in fact, be the most important question that I'll ask today. A lot's been said in the last month about how dedicated everyone is to cleaning up East Palestine and helping its residents. Moving the dirt pile is the concern now, but we all know this isn't over. So, Administrator Shore, can you state for the record in this committee, do you concur with Administrator Regan that even after the cameras turn off and the news cycle moves on, when he said the EPA will be working to make things right in this community, quote, for the long haul, or do you agree with that? You're going to continue to work to make things right?
Yes, Congressman Johnson.
What does the long haul finished job look like to you? What does that mean?
It means a variety of things. We will establish a long-term monitoring plan for soils throughout the community, for water system, surface water streams, and continue doing air monitoring as warranted. I personally expect to be visiting East Palestine and picnicking instead of having press conferences with neighbors and residents for months and possibly years to come.
I thank you for that. I yield back to Mr. Balderson. Gentleman yields. The chair now recognizes the gentleman from Maryland, Mr. Sarbanes, for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate you setting a substantive tone for the hearing at the outset. I want to thank our witnesses for being here. As we've all been saying, the health and environmental consequences that have been visited upon the East Palestine community are inexcusable. Norfolk Southern must be held accountable for causing the incident, and I know that ongoing inquiry into accountability is going to continue. When polluters are jeopardizing our safety and harmful incidents like this occur, we turn to the EPA and we turn to state and local partners for protection and remediation, and I wholeheartedly believe Americans deserve to be safeguarded from hazardous chemicals. And when contamination occurs, we have to have access to thorough and expedient cleanup opportunities. I do have to make the observation that there's on the floor this week a bill from our Republican colleagues, their H.R. 1 bill, which would actually limit some of EPA's regulatory authorities, like the ones that are being used right now to ensure proper handling of the disaster. And it's wrong to put the interests of polluters over the safety and security of communities across the country. In East Palestine, EPA deployed within hours, as you've described, to provide on-site support of state and local responders, including monitoring the air and water quality, so critical. EPA has also exercised its authorities to oversee Norfolk Southern's cleanup obligations. We appreciate that. As part of its EPA-mandated cleanup activity, Norfolk Southern contracted with an industrial wastewater treatment company in Baltimore, where I'm from, to process liquid wastewater from the derailment. It was initially announced that this treated wastewater would then be discharged through the Back River wastewater treatment plant, which, for those who are not aware, has had its own significant challenges recently, some of which have required Maryland's Department of the Environment to intercede. While it seems, based on an announcement just this morning from that Baltimore company, that the wastewater might ultimately be treated elsewhere, this is kind of a evolving story. We're still working with others in the federal, state, and local delegation to get the specifics of that new plan. And regardless of where the wastewater is ultimately treated, I'm very concerned about making sure, and I'm sure you can understand this, that these efforts do not jeopardize the health and safety of Marylanders, Chesapeake Bay, or other communities. Since Norfolk Southern is missing from this hearing today, I can't ask them directly how they intend to ensure that this wastewater treatment will not pose a threat to the communities and environments it is discharged in. So instead, I'll ask you, Administrator Shore, how exactly will EPA ensure that this remediation will not impact the health, safety, and security of the communities where the remediation will take place? In other words, you've spoken a lot about what's happening in East Palestine, but could you speak a little bit about this issue of where the discharge is going for treatment?
Thank you, Congressman Sarbanes, and I certainly respect and appreciate your concern and care for your constituents. I encourage, as Congressman Johnson did, everyone to extend that care and concern to the people in East Palestine and the surrounding communities. EPA has a list of disposal sites that can accept solid or liquid waste, hazardous waste, and they must apply to be on that list, and EPA conducts a thorough review of their capacity and treatment processes, and only when they have passed this rigorous application and review are they added to this CERCLA list of approved facilities for off-site disposal. We've made that list available to Norfolk Southern, and they are now required and have been since the start of this emergency response, but certainly under the unilateral administrative order, to identify and enter into contracts only with disposal sites that meet those rigorous standards. And we have additional safeguards, as Director Vogel mentioned, during the loading, the transport, and the unloading of hazardous waste.
Thank you very much. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. The chair now recognizes the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Weber, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman. Director Vogel, the status of the pile of excavator waste is a major concern. You've heard that. It's nothing new. What precautions are being taken to prevent blowing or drifting of contaminated soils from that pile into the community? And how long should we expect to have to kind of monitor that?
Congressman, thank you for your question. The piles are managed by professionals. They were built, they were designed to hold the contaminated soil. They are, I know Congressman Johnson's been out there, they're lined and they're covered in layers and carefully compacted to make sure that there isn't drifting or blowing. How long?
Go ahead.
It may take several more months to get all of the soil out.
So when they transport that contaminated soil, closed container or a container with some kind of lid on it, or do you know?
Yes, Congressman, it's trucked out of East Palestine, so loaded and trucked. The trucks go through a wash station that it's inspected to make sure that it's covered completely and sealed, and then the tires are washed to make sure that no contaminated soil is getting onto the roads.
I know this is way down in the weeds, or maybe way down in the drainage system, however you want to look at it, but when they wash those tires and wheels, is that water captured and treated or checked?
Congressman, yes, sir, it is. It's in a pad, and so that water is vacuumed and stored in those blue vac tanks
Okay.
for disposal.
Well, I'm glad to hear the term tanks, because I've seen a lot of 18-wheelers on the highway. Some of them have a cover like a tarp. I'm hoping that this is a completely enclosed tank.
For the liquids, it is
Oh, and dirt
tank.
too, for that matter.
The soil is in trucks that are covered and sealed.
Okay. And I think she might have answered this earlier. What steps are being taken to keep the community safe as contaminated soil is excavated? I guess the real question there is there an air monitoring process? If there's an accident, is there a system set up to notify everybody?
Congressman, I would defer to US EPA, but as Administrator Shore has explained, the Tauga bus, that real-time air monitoring bus drives a route around.
Okay, well, I
basin sites.
apologize. I was in another committee
No,
here. Yeah.
Happy to talk about it again. And as far as notifying people if there are any detections, we haven't had any health concerning detections. However, there is a process in place. I believe whenever there's any sort of concern, the work would be stopped immediately, would be the plan.
Administrator Shore, I'll go to you. Contaminated from air deposition has been an issue of concern in the community and what these exposures may mean. And of course, the $64 question, the loaded question, I'm guessing you're concerned about people's health in their homes, and I know you are. Can you elaborate on exactly what precautions are being taken, pardon me, to protect them in their homes, and how quick that notice would go out if there was a problem?
Thank you, Congressman. I noted previously, EPA has deployed a comprehensive network of air monitoring and testing equipment, a multi-layered approach. There are 23 sites where these SUMA canisters and sorbent tubes are installed around the community. We have this Tagabus, both monitoring the fence line of the work site and driving through the community. It can produce real-time analysis of air samples so that if there were any spikes seen, notification can be made through the unified command and through the local emergency management agency. EPA and Norfolk Southern have safety officers on site at the excavation site that meet every morning and discuss the work plan and what safety precautions are in place, and they are there on site should anything occur at the work site.
And I know that one of our questions was, of course, EPA, with this Comprehensive Environmental Response Compensation Liability Act, CERCLA, authority to order Norfolk Southern to clean people's houses. What should we tell them in the last 10 seconds, my time, they're cleaning out of houses?
That was a plan that is still being negotiated with the railroad to what the specifics of that cleaning program will be. We expect it'll be rolled out in several weeks. That was done out of an abundance of caution, understanding that people had concerns. But because we aren't detecting any elevated levels of chemicals of concern outside of people's homes, we have a very high confidence that they're not inside people's homes.
All right, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
The gentleman yields back. Director Shore, or I'm sorry, Administrator Shore, Mr. Sarbanes asked about the list of approved disposal sites. Would you provide that list for the record to our committee?
Yes, Congressman, I believe we can.
Okay, thank you. The chair now recognizes the gentleman from Georgia, Mr. Allen, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman Johnson, for holding this important hearing today to discuss the government response to Norfolk Southern train derailment in East Palestine, Ohio. I certainly want to express my continued thoughts and prayers to the people impacted by this tragic accident. We don't want any community in America to have to endure what the people of East Palestine have had to endure the past month. Their lives have been disrupted, and it is a tragedy. I know this impacted your district directly, Mr. Chair, and I thank you for all the work you have done being on the ground and working directly with the government entities and communicating to this committee and to your colleagues here in Congress the urgency of an investigation to prevent these in the future. As we continue to investigate this, government response is critical in ensuring all entities have a clear understanding of their roles and responsibilities are crucial. Director Vogel, you have been on the ground and know firsthand all government entities are working to respond to the derailment. Could you discuss Ohio's EPA working relationship with other government agencies, whether federal or local, in responding to the train derailment?
Congressman, thank you for your question. Ohio EPA, of course, our emergency response team was on the ground at 12:25 a.m. They were the first to arrive. US EPA followed shortly thereafter, and we have a very clear delineation of duties on the ground. I think we've been working very closely. Ohio EPA is part of Unified Command, so in terms of reviewing the work plans of Norfolk Southern, reviewing the work that's ongoing on the track. We both have on-scene coordinators there every single day out looking around the site, making sure that the work is being done according to plan. So it's a very collaborative effort with our federal response partners.
Have there been has it been a challenge to coordinate federal and state efforts in regard to trying to get to the bottom and bottom of the issue, the cleanup, and the investigation?
Congressman, I can't think of a challenge that we've had with our federal response partners. I think we've been very coordinated in doing our best to get information from the railroad at times and making sure that they are doing the work plans appropriately. But in terms of coordinating with our federal and local partners, it's been a very good working relationship.
Administrator Shore, it's your turn. What do you consider, or how would you consider the relationship should look like, and how did it look in this incident between local, state, and federal government?
Like Director Vogel, Congressman, I think this has been an example of close coordination, close collaboration, respectful partnership. Director Vogel is on my speed dial, and we talk frequently, and I've been with her at numerous meetings in East Palestine, and that will continue.
Well, thank you for your response and the coordination and how you're working together. As far as just a follow-up, as far as overprescribed agencies, can you describe what enforcement authorities U.S. EPA has under the Comprehensive Environmental Response Compensation and Liability Act, and what is it using for the cleanup?
Under CERCLA, as you note, that grants EPA the authority to hold a principal responsible party, in this case Norfolk Southern, responsible and accountable, so that they will be required to pay for all the costs of the cleanup, not only their own costs, but those of EPA and the other responding agencies.
In your opinion, I've got just 30 seconds left, how is the recovery going, and how are we doing as far as getting this right? How's the process going? Fast enough, not fast enough? What can we do to help?
As Chairman Johnson and Chairman McMorris Rogers noted, Norfolk Southern has encountered some difficulties in finding and establishing contracts with sites to accept both liquid and solid waste. And I think we could accelerate the cleanup if they were able to fulfill that obligation more expeditiously.
Great. Thank you so much for your testimony this morning, and I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
The gentleman yields back. The chair now recognizes my colleague and head trauma physician, personal head trauma physician, Dr. Ruiz from California for 5 minutes.
I hope the wound's getting better.
It's all better. Thank you.
Good. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Access to clean air and clean drinking water is a human right and a common good for all. As a physician and a public health expert and the chairman's personal trauma physician, I have seen firsthand how important these are for our communities and our children. The residents of East Palestine deserve to know that the air they breathe and the water they drink are clean. And Congress has an important role in ensuring that the federal, state, and local government responses protect the health of the local community. That's why I'm very happy we're definitely having this hearing today. So Dr. Vince, can you talk to us about some of the health concerns folks are coming into your office with?
Yeah, certainly. So we have, thank you for the question, Congressman Ruiz. We have two avenues really where we're receiving feedback from the community. So we have the Community Health Assessment Clinic, which we've established, as I had in my testimony, at the First Church of Christ. The clinic, as residents come in, keep in mind it's not a treatment or a diagnosis clinic, but it's more about a navigation clinic. And so we invite the residents to come in to talk about and kind of capture their experience and try to summarize and help them quantify what their concerns are. As you can imagine, it's extremely traumatic, being displaced from your home, and so sometimes residents...
what are some of the health concerns they have?
So the health concerns that we're seeing largely are headaches through the health assessment clinic, as well as our ACE survey, headaches, and anxiety, where more than half of our residents are experiencing those two.
And what are some of the long-term health concerns that residents and your providers have?
We've heard a whole wide range of concerns long-term. Certainly cancer is first and foremost because of much of the information that the residents see online and hear, as well as reproductive concerns, growth concerns, hormonal concerns for their
children. Do you think there's a potential with the carcinogens or any of the toxins that it could lead to ailments 4 or 5 years from now?
Yeah, I understand your question. Yeah, so some of the constituents that we have related to this response obviously are carcinogenic. However, we're seeing low levels is really the initial response. So I think the long question is, we don't know.
We don't know.
And that's my...
and that adds to the anxiety.
I'm sorry?
And that adds to the anxiety that
Yes,
people
sir.
have because we don't know.
Yes, sir.
While we may still be in the cleanup phase, I want to make sure we are thinking about the health impacts this community is potentially facing in the long term. So Regional Administrator Shore and Director Vogel, what are your respective agencies doing to make sure that the health and well-being of the communities are taken care of? And looking to the future, what infrastructure are you putting in place to make sure that the cost burden of future health impacts isn't falling on the residents of East Palestine?
Congressman, thank you for your question. On the municipal water side, two things. We're testing the Sentinel wells to make sure that if there's any contamination in the creeks, it's not getting into the groundwater. And if it is, we'll know long before it gets to the well field. But also, the railroad is paying for a secondary and advanced treatment system at the water treatment plant so that if there is any detection found, this is an abundance of caution step for the future, just as you said. We have put an order in for the granular activated carbon system. I can announce that the village approved that last night. So.
Great. Administrator Shore.
Thank you, Congressman. As I stated, EPA will be there as long as it takes.
Good.
For the residents of East Palestine to feel that they are...
Good. You know who else needs to be there? Norfolk Southern needs to be there. So I do want to add that I think this committee needs to hear from Norfolk Southern directly, and Norfolk Southern needs to commit to long-term financial assistance for healthcare costs for impacts stemming from the toxic derailments. They also need to commit to long-term engagement on the ground should any further contamination be found. And they need to provide assurances that other communities won't find themselves in the position that East Palestine is in today. My district is home to another major freight operations, and trains go through many cities in my district. Unfortunately, we have seen the local freight railroad, Union Pacific, repeatedly stop in the middle of Beaumont City. This turns the town into a parking lot and endangers lives by blocking emergency services from reaching their destinations in a timely manner, another health risk. I think a lot of people, including local leaders in my district, want to know how a railroad can properly prevent a hazardous chemical spill if that railroad can't even ensure that the trains won't block essential traffic. To that end, Norfolk Southern should be here today to account for what caused the derailment in the first place, discuss their current and future cleanup efforts, and how they will prevent this from happening again. Thank you, and I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. The chair now recognizes Mr. Palmer for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman Johnson. Just a couple of questions. Is the EPA looking at using the unilateral administrative order in regard to the railroad and the cleanup operations?
Congressman, I'm not sure I heard your properly.
sorry.
I'm a bit hearing challenged, but if I did, EPA did issue a unilateral administrative order on February 21st. It went into effect on the 27th, precisely to hold Norfolk Southern accountable and to ensure that they will pay all the costs of the cleanup.
Thank you. In regard to what happened immediately after the derailment and the burning of the resins that was involved there, obviously those are not generally considered hazardous, but when you burn things like that, you have releases that otherwise wouldn't have been a problem had you not burned them. Is that part of the air quality evaluation that you're doing, aside from the toxic chemicals that were released as a result of the derailment?
Could you rephrase your question? I'm sorry, I have trouble hearing you.
I understand that immediately afterwards, one of the things that was done to clean up the chemical spill was to burn the resin. There were pellets that, as I understand, were part of what was on that train that derailed, and those were set on fire to try to obviously burn them up, but also to burn up the chemicals. And obviously, when you involve heat and something like that, there are other problems that are created. You may incinerate all of the chemicals, but you're also releasing perhaps PCBs, other things like that into the atmosphere. Was that part of the air quality criteria that you looked into post the derailment?
Congressman, yes, it was. We continued to assess what was happening on the ground and adjust our response, and identified a suite of what we called indicator chemicals that were likely to be produced by the burning of various compounds and so on, and included those in our suite of things we were measuring for.
Thank you. That's part of what Chairman Johnson and I discussed immediately after the derailment of what they were doing in that regard for trying to contain the chemicals. With that, I'd be happy to yield the balance of my time to the chairman.
I thank the gentleman for yielding. Director Vogel, I want to ask you the same question that I asked Administrator Shore a little bit ago. Governor DeWine, in a recent Senate hearing, said that the state of Ohio will not abandon East Palestine. I believe the governor is sincere in that comment, but for the record here today, do we have the commitment from you that your agency and our state government will not abandon the people of East Palestine? And to that end, in your view, what does it look like to fulfill this commitment now and into the future?
Congressman, thank you for the question. Of course, we're Ohio. We live there. We're not going anywhere. My entire staff on the ground is from Northeast Ohio. It is their home. So we will be in, as long as it takes in terms of the cleanup, but also as Dr. Binns has said and the governor has announced, this long-term health clinic. There's a mental health grant that has been made available to the village as well. So it's not only the environmental cleanup, but to rest assured that the governor's entire cabinet is committed to that.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Administrator Shore, I want to go back to something that came up just a little bit ago. You made the statement that we could accelerate the cleanup, that Norfolk Southern could accelerate the cleanup. Is there any evidence, even after the letter that the EPA sent out, is there any evidence that any of these states that have certified, licensed, capable disposal sites are yielding to pressures from within their state, from state officials and others, to either through price gouging, perhaps, or capacity excuses, denying the capability for Norfolk Southern to get those disposal sites so that they can more quickly remove that soil? Because we're going to dig into this issue more because I'm really concerned about how that has been handled overall. But any evidence that Norfolk Southern is suffering because of that?
Chairman Johnson, I respectfully suggest that that question is best directed to Norfolk Southern. The unilateral order requires.
Yeah, but
Norfolk
EPA
Southern-
oversees CERCLA, and you have that list. That legal precedent, that legal requirement for states to not interfere in interstate commerce, that is overseen by the EPA. So do you have any evidence that there's been any additional roadblocks to Norfolk Southern getting the access that they need to get this material moved? And if you don't have an answer to that, you can look into it and get back to us.
Let me do that, sir. Thank you.
Okay, all right, thank you. With that, the chair now recognizes the gentlelady, Ms. Betticon, for her 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Director Vogel, in your testimony, you said soil testing does not show any unsafe levels of contamination in lawns. For dioxins, this is measured in toxicity equivalents, and the contamination level for EPA that triggers a cleanup in residential areas is 1,000 parts per trillion or above. What level of toxin is the testing looking for to determine whether the soil toxicity is unsafe?
Congressman, I would defer to US EPA on the dioxin testing. It is a work plan that is underway for soils in the area. There were dioxins tested for in Indiana as well from some of the waste, and those results are publicly available. I am aware that there are some preliminary lab tests back that have not shown any concerning health levels of contamination in the soil in the park, for example, that I mentioned today. But I would defer to Deborah Shore for any other follow-up on that.
Congressman Barragan, let me add that the soil samples are still being, going through quality assurance through the laboratory, but the preliminary reports are that there are nothing above what might be considered normal background levels in the places where these soil samples have been taken.
So is there like a level that is considered unsafe? I'm just trying to, if the testing has been done and they've determined that there's nothing unsafe, there's not unsafe levels, can you tell us what they're looking for that would determine that something is unsafe?
I'd have to refer you to our toxicologists. I'll be happy to arrange a conversation with them and you and your staff.
Okay. For many states, the contamination level is lower than the federal standard. In California, it's 50 parts per trillion. In Michigan, it's 90 parts per trillion. In 2010, EPA scientists recommended to lower the federal cleanup trigger to 72 parts per trillion, but it did not move forward. In 2012, an EPA assessment found the safe level children can be in a regular contact with dioxins is 50 parts per trillion or less. Does anybody know if any of the soil tested in East Palestine have toxicity above 50 parts per trillion?
I have not seen the qualified results, but I'm happy to share them with you once we get them.
Okay. And I'm assuming Director Vogel, you don't have anything either.
I don't, and I would just echo that once we do have tests, we do publish them and we make them publicly available.
Commissioner Vins, anything on this?
I have nothing additional, thank you.
Okay. Administrator Shore, one concern my office has heard is that relocation costs are not being covered by Norfolk Southern for everyone in East Palestine. How is it determined whether a resident is eligible to have their relocation costs paid for?
I'm sorry to hear that. My understanding was that Norfolk Southern was covering temporary relocation costs for any resident who sought that. And I would direct you to Norfolk Southern to ask why they are being turned down.
Can the EPA require that Norfolk Southern cover relocation costs for anyone in East Palestine?
I'll find out.
Okay, Dr. Vince, the testing of drinking water, air, and soils have been found to be within safe levels. However, your testimony cites examples of residents complaining of sore throats and headaches. The Ohio Department of Health announced last week it has surveyed 450 residents, and 3/4 suffered from headaches, and half had skin irritation, pain, or burning. Many had anxiety, coughs, or fatigue. Should we be alarmed by this discrepancy? And do you think it's safe now to be a resident in East Palestine?
Yeah, thank you for the question, Congresswoman. At this point, we don't have any evidence of contamination associated with the derailment. However, we do continue to hear these concerns. I'm familiar with some of this information as it comes out of our health assessment clinic, in addition to the ACE survey. And these are the reasons that we continue to do the ACE survey and stand up the health clinic, in addition to the ongoing monitoring of the groundwater relative to the private wells and our state and federal partners to monitor air and municipal water as well.
Well, thank you for that. I want to just, my hearts go out to your constituents, Mr. Chairman. And as we've heard today, we really need Norfolk Southern here. Some of the questions they were not able to answer or defer to them. And if I'm a resident, and you said this hearing's about the residents, if I'm a resident, the first question I'm asking is, what happened? How did this happen? And that requires somebody to be here to be able to also respond to that. With that, Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
I thank the gentlewoman for yielding back, and as I've stated repeatedly, we will have our day to ask those questions with the railroad, but it's not today. With that, the chair recognizes the gentlelady from Iowa, Ms. Miller Meeks, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I thank all of our witnesses for being here today to both provide testimony and answer questions. Administrator Shore, I first want to thank you for being on the ground in East Palestine community and making outreach to those affected by the derailment. Certainly, that's the utmost and foremost thing that we should be doing. One aspect of EPA's activities in East Palestine that has come up a few times is confusion between monitoring and sampling. And let me just say, I'm a physician and former director of the Iowa Department of Public Health. I'm hoping that we can have a discussion about that. Is EPA using monitoring to measure the levels of chemicals in people's homes, or is EPA using sampling, and why?
Congresswoman, my understanding is that EPA has been using monitoring devices inside homes because our suite of highly sophisticated measuring, monitoring, and sampling devices outside homes has provided us with information showing that there aren't elevated levels outside, so we had no expectation we would see them inside.
So your thought is that the equipment is capable of determining if the chemical is below the safe exposure level?
I'm sorry, could you repeat the question?
So then from that I infer that you think the equipment itself is capable of determining that the chemical is below the safe exposure level?
We think so, yes.
And what about a mixture of chemicals? So is the detection equipment able to determine if exposure to the mixture of chemicals is below the safe exposure level rather than just an individual chemical?
As I understand it, these This equipment can test for a suite of volatile organic compounds up to 59.
Thank you. Director Vogel, in your testimony, you referenced that the removal of contaminated soil and water from East Palestine will likely take another 2 months. Does that timeline assume that the current pace of waste removal will continue?
Congressman, yes, we are seeing as many as 40, 45 trucks a day taking soil out of East Palestine this week. So if that pace continues, yes.
And do you foresee any challenges to achieving full removal of soil and water waste in 2 months?
As Administrator Shore has said, contingent on finding Norfolk Southern finding additional contracts with places to take the soil. I'm not going to predict that there will be no more challenges, but things are on pace as of today.
And how is the Ohio EPA working with the U.S. EPA, the Columbiana County General Health District, and Norfolk Southern to meet that goal?
I think we're working very closely together. Again, as all part of Unified Command, there are morning meetings, but there are also meetings, operational meetings throughout the day, public health meetings that all of our, the state, the feds, and the locals are represented on. So I think that is a very close collaboration.
Thank you. And I'm going to go back to the sampling data and discuss the quality assurance of the sampling data. So, Director Shore, has EPA sampling data been quality assured?
Congresswoman, I believe that the samples from the SUMA canister sent for laboratory analysis have gone through that quality assurance. I need to learn more about the real-time sampling that's done by the Tagabus.
So the reason I asked, the EPA's website says it's not. So Director Vogel, do you have any information on that?
The US EPA website, or okay, I can't speak to that. Ohio EPA website posts the sampling data for the municipal wells directly from the labs.
So I guess my concern is if the EPA's website says that the sampling data hasn't been quality assured, how did the EPA make the determination that the air is safe to breathe when it appears that the sampling data has not been quality assured?
Congresswoman, I'm going to ask our staff to get back to you with an answer for that.
Thank you very much. We'd appreciate having that submitted to us after the committee. Thank you so much, Mr. Chair.
Will the gentleman, lady, yield the remaining time?
Yes, sir. I'll yield the remaining time.
Dr. Vins, in your testimony, you call for a long-term private well sampling program. Has Norfolk Southern engaged with you on creating and funding this program?
We have not had that conversation. Thank you.
Okay. Has the Ohio Department of Health provided any additional support to do that?
For the long-term program, sir?
Right, right.
At this point, we have not had that long-term conversation.
Any progress that you can report on that front?
Well, at this point, our sampling program is an ongoing monitoring effort. The frequency of that program has not been established as to what the long-term needs might be, and that's why the monitoring at this point is very important.
Okay, and Director Vogel, has the Ohio EPA been involved in any of these discussions?
We would be happy to. Congressman, Ohio EPA is responsible for the public water systems. Refer to the county on the private wells.
Okay.
We'd be happy to be part of the
conversation. With that, the chair now recognizes, now that all members of the subcommittee have had a chance to ask their questions, we now go to Ms. Dingle from the full committee from Michigan for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and for all the work that you've done. No community in America should ever have to endure the level of devastation and concern to both public health and the environment that resulted in the aftermath of this derailment in your district. This is an important hearing for this committee to hold, and I want to thank the EPA Administrator Shore, as well as Ohio EPA and the Columbiana County for agreeing to be here today, because we can learn from what you are saying. Your testimony and experience will be valuable for understanding the successful efforts that have gone into this federal, state, and local response to protect the health and safety of the people of East Palestine. It's our shared duty. Unfortunately, I've gotten to know the EPA Region 5 Administrator fairly well, because while we haven't had anything quite as bad as you had, we've had hexavalent chromium spills, gas leaks into sewer systems. We know the Tagabus well. And so I know what these issues are. Mr. Chairman, I know everybody says this, but I got to say it again. I find it deeply confounding that the responsible party for this disaster is not here. How can we possibly get a full understanding of what happened in East Palestine and the cleanup effort that continues if the company responsible is not here? Norfolk Southern should have been invited as a witness here today, and I want to say that for the record, and I don't think that anybody understands the critical role that they are still playing to make any of them able to do their job. But one of the reasons I'm here is following the Norfolk Southern derailment, the controlled burn of the hazardous materials, and the unilateral administrative order issued by EPA under CERCLA to Norfolk Southern to clean up the site. On Friday, February 24th, I learned from a press release from the governor that was posted that some of the hazardous materials were already there by the time that we learned about it, one in my district and one close by. And I think there's been a lot of misinformation about what happened that night as well. Some of the initial disposal shipments made it to their destinations. 300,000 gallons of hazardous liquid were accepted and disposed at the Romulus injection well site, and 360 tons of soil were accepted and disposed of in Van Buren. What most people don't understand is that the CERCLA, the Romulus injection well, which I happen to know very well because it's been the site of, look, I opposed it when it was first built, it's been shut down, and I knew it was not CERCLA certified. So I started asking questions immediately. Most people didn't even understand what I was asking. EPA did, and I want to thank them for working with us to prevent further material from going to a non-certified site. And I want to thank all of you for going above and beyond to try to do community outreach, which is really important in these situations. Administrator Shore, could you explain in more detail for this committee why it took so long for EPA to be designated as the lead oversight agency and what role Norfolk Southern played in sending those materials to Michigan? It was they that made the decision, not you at first, correct?
Thank you, Congresswoman Dingell, and I appreciate your support and engagement. I'm told it's typical in these emergency response situations where the lead agency in the initial days of the response is the state, which has delegated authority from federal EPA, and Ohio EPA was serving in that role quite ably, and we were working together in that capacity. Norfolk Southern made the decisions about where it was going to transport the liquid and solid waste. And we don't make that choice even now under CERCLA. We just provide them with a list of approved sites.
So as I listen to Ohio EPA talk about your confidence, Norfolk Southern's not here, but I've sure had a lot of conversations, and I think there are sites that if Norfolk Southern would pay a little more money, that could be sent to now, and I think, Mr. Chairman, we should be asking that question. But right now, Administrator Shore, now that the administrative order is in place, I just want assurances that you are certifying and confirming all waste sites are approved to accept hazardous waste being sent to them, correct?
Yes, under CERCLA, it's required. And we made sure that the disposal site has to be on that off-site approval list. They have to have the capacity, and they need to have a binding agreement, either a letter of intent or a contract with Norfolk Southern.
Mr. Chairman, I'm out of time, but I'd like your permission to put more questions in the record because I've unfortunately learned too much in the last couple of years about the importance of federal, state, and local governments working together, what they can do, what they can't do, and maybe there's some things we could work on together to improve.
Okay, thank you. Gentlelady's time has expired. Since no one else is seeking time, I would ask unanimous consent that two I yield to the
No,
ranking member.
you're entering
Yes.
into the record. I'll let
Yeah,
you.
I ask unanimous consent that 2 letters be added for the record, a letter from the Association of American Railroads and comments from the National Safety Council. And for what purposes of ranking member?
I just want to share that I believe that I'm encouraged by the cooperative, collaborative efforts being made in that partnership with federal and state government and local government, I should include. And so that's encouraging, and again, commit myself to help however possible in this situation. I do caution, though, if we go to 2022 levels of appropriations, it puts this situation at risk. I would hope that the majority would not do that because it would perhaps put pressure on EPA to get this work done correctly, especially if Norfolk Southern should abandon its responsibilities to move in its corporate responsible way. So let's make certain that we have these budget items down so correctly that they will be a strong force in getting this work done. With that, I yield back.
Thank the gentleman for yielding back. Let it be said for anybody that's looking, who wonder if Republicans and Democrats can ever agree with each other. I agree with what my ranking member just said, and I too am pleased with the collaborative efforts of the U.S. EPA, the state EPA, and the local county health officials and others that have been so involved in this. We've got a long way to go before this is finished. I can assure you that I am definitely here for the long haul. And I've restated that, and I'll restate it for this committee. The long haul is when the people of East Palestine say we're done. That's when it's done, not until. With that, I remind members that they have 10 business days to submit questions for the record, and I ask the witnesses to respond to the questions promptly. Members should submit their questions by the close of business on April 11th. Without objection, the committee is adjourned. Thank you, panelists, for being here today.